In today's aviation news recap, there's updates surrounding an airline set to upgrade its Airbus A380. Then moving over to Asia, an airline is battling grounded aircraft. And lastly, Etihad Airways has revealed some pretty positive news. But let's begin with those aircraft groundings. Vietnam Airlines has identified itself as the latest victim of the ongoing Pratt Whitney engine difficulties, noting that it'll be forced to ground 12 Airbus A321 aircraft for up to 300 days per VN Express. 12 aircraft being parked does also represent a staggering 20% of its domestic fleet and highlights the significant global effects being felt on the airline thanks to the crisis. These issues now hurting Vietnam Airlines correlate to a condition affecting the powder metal used in Pratt Whitney engine. These engines power several Airbus types and were first discovered and formally identified in 2023. VN Express also cites that the CEO of Vietnam Airlines says its Airbus A321 aircraft wouldn't be the only type impacted by the ongoing problems. He said that Airbus A350s are also feeling the effects of their own engine difficulties, however they didn't reveal more. Obviously, Pratt & Whitney does not power these A350s. As a result of everything we're seeing, the airline says airfares will rise in the short to medium term because of the persistent groundings and overall their impact on Vietnam Airlines' ability to offer a smooth schedule. While unrelated to engine difficulties, an airfare rise shouldn't necessarily come as a shock. Take a look at budget carrier Ryanair, who are warning themselves of rising airfares as they struggle to acquire 737 MAX jets on time. Ryanair is forecasting significantly fewer deliveries across the 2024 calendar year because of production and certification issues. This will impact their ability to offer a robust schedule. At Vietnam Airlines, the parking of aircraft will also impact their ability to offer a robust frequency that they would ideally want to put forward. Looking ahead, Vietnam Airlines will need to navigate the turbulence caused by these groundings, which is set to be for the long term, rather than, say, the short term. The airline noted that thanks to the bruised and beaten supply chains, rectifying this problem quickly isn't necessarily possible, and they're in it for the long haul. This is obviously more than evident through the 300-day period that is quoted, and Pratt & Whitney themselves coming out and identifying this being a multi-year process to rectify everything negative that has gone on. While battling these problems, Vietnam Airlines will, to a certain extent, probably seek comfort in knowing that they aren't necessarily the only airline being impacted by something similar. Additionally, it's not necessarily something wrong with them as an airline, it's an exterior problem impacting Airbus aircraft because of the Pratt & Whitney difficulties. The reality is, on a more broader scale, and if you do tune into these videos frequently, or maybe you just keep up with the industry away from my channel, airlines right around the world have been forced to either slash their schedule, ground planes, lease aircraft, adjust deliveries, and report negative financial performance, all because of what we're seeing take place in the engine world. Moving on to our next story in today's proceedings, that is, British Airways has unveiled plans to upgrade its Airbus A380s as part of a broader multi-billion-dollar investment into its fleet and business. As part of the investment strictly into its fleet, the airline has said it'll introduce a new and exclusive first suite, building upon being the only European airline to offer first class between the UK and US on your transatlantic services. The carrier does see potential in enhancing this. If all goes according to plan, which, let's be honest, how often does that really happen? The new first-class suite will debut towards the end of 2025, but very potentially into early 2026. This is part of a more broader plan to refurbish the Airbus A380. Aside from the touched-on first-class suite plan, the airline will also install its club suites on the planes. This is a previously announced development. The A380 isn't the first aircraft type that is going to be refurbished. Over recent years, other aircraft types have also been revamped to allow the airline to compete better and have a more up-to-date cabin with current offerings that are going to please its customers. British Airways updating the interiors of its A380 was first unveiled in 2023, with the airline believing the investment would increase customer satisfaction levels alongside several other investments that will be made in due course. Obviously, you can see why British Airways are making these investments. In the last 4 years or so, maybe even before the pandemic, many would argue, the service levels of BA have dropped considerably, and they want to improve this. They think one of the first steps is to improve what product is presented to people upon stepping on board their aircraft. Speaking of the A380, while not being the most favourable wide-body for airlines around the world, it has repeatedly proved itself to be a consumer favourite. Being the world's largest passenger plane, the space seen on the series can't be found anywhere else, and as a result, airlines have been able to boost revenue through new unseen products. British Airways is more than aware of the love for the A380. Its CEO in 2023 discussed that love and expressed how investments in refurbishing the series would increase customer comfort and has touched on satisfaction levels. During the height of the pandemic, you may also recall that airlines around the world parked these A380s, trying to minimize losses. However, for an aircraft so large and for most airlines inefficient, there were pretty serious question marks over its return. We had countless airlines saying they had no intention of flying it again, but British Airways, alongside Emirates and Qantas, arguably were the trio that backed the aircraft from day one, and believed that when eventually demand would return, the A380 would have a solid place in their fleet. The masses have welcomed the aircraft type's return to service, and now the airline is again highlighting its commitment with this sizable investment. On to the final story, and that is Etihad Airways, who have published a USD 394 million operating result for the full year of 2023, based on a 40% increase in passengers year over year. But really, the stellar figure is annual profits reached 143 million, representing a 472% increase from 1 year prior. The result represents a continued positive movement in the long-winded turnaround plan, which was sparked following losses reaching almost USD 2 billion in the mid-stages of the 2010s. Etihad Airways says that the strong performance seen across 2023 follows this turnaround plan being implemented, and it's been a success. Over the years, the airline has, for instance, looked to sharpen its core business and focus on restructuring its fleet by bringing in the latest aircraft types to boost efficiency. Additionally, the airline has focused intensely on streamlining and ensuring that its route network aligns with areas that see crucial levels of demand. But ultimately, the route has to make sense. These are all essential factors, considering one of the primary reasons why we saw the downfall commence was thanks to a rather uncalculated major fleet and route expansion that you could argue the company wasn't ready for in the end. Some of the highlights include a total revenue increase of 11%. Cargo revenue, interestingly, did drop, but that is very similar to what other operators are recording. 14 million passengers boarded Etihad Airways aircraft across the calendar year, which Etihad describes as remarkable growth. It also represents an increase of almost 50% year over year. To accompany the passenger increase, load factors rose 4% points to 86%. Etihad notes that this makes them among the highest in its area of operating, which means it should be applauded and indicates their ability to not just optimize their fleet and routes, but ensure that the services that they are loading on are going to see strong demand levels. That's going to conclude today's aviation news. If you've got any thoughts, let me know down below in the comments. Again, I will say this is a pre-recorded video from the 7th of March that is being published now, as I'm currently traveling and my capacity to record is very, very limited. So how am I mitigating that? Recording significantly in advance. I appreciate your understanding and your patience, and I'll get back to you with fresh updates as soon as possible. And we'll